Let me ask you a question. What does a perfect crime look like? Maybe you picture a dark alley, a remote forest, a deep lake in the dead of night, a place meant for secrets. Now, let me show you a different picture. A bright, sunny morning in Michigan. A sprawling family farm, 3,000 acres of buzzing activity. Tractors rolling, employees coming and going, the smell of earth and diesel in the air. A big farmhouse right in the middle of it all. This is where Dee Warner lived. This is where she was last seen alive. And this is where, for 3 long years, everyone believed she simply vanished. Walked away from her life, her children, her million-dollar business, into thin air. Her husband said so. He had a story for everything. The packed bag, the missing phone, the wedding ring left behind. A story of a dramatic wife, running off to start over. It was a good story. It was almost believable. Until you learned to read the farm. Until you saw what was hiding, not in the shadows, but in the glaring, obvious light of day. This is not a story about a disappearance. This is a story about a disappearance act. A performance staged on the grandest set of all, a man's own life. It's about how he used the most ordinary things, a piece of farm equipment, a daily routine, a rusty old tank, to try and hide the most terrible sin. He thought his world would keep his secret. He thought the sheer normalcy of it all would make the truth invisible. He thought no one would ever find her. This is the story of how a family and a determined group of detectives learned to see the invisible. This is the story of the perfect hiding place that wasn't. Sunday, April 25, 2021. A day that dawned with routine in Lenawee County, Michigan. For Raquel Warner, routine meant Sunday brunch with her mother, Dee. It was their ritual, a cornerstone in the whirlwind of their busy lives. That morning, Raquel drove down Munger Road, past the familiar fields of the Warner farm, toward the large farmhouse. She probably thought about what they'd eat, what stores they'd hit. The normal, comforting thoughts of a daughter on her way to see her mom. But the moment she stepped into the house, the air felt different. Silence. Not a peaceful silence. A thick, waiting silence. The kind that feels like a held breath. Mom. No answer. The house, usually full of Dee's energetic presence, felt hollow. No coffee brewing. No music playing. Just the empty hum of a refrigerator. Raquel called her cell. Straight to voicemail. A text message. Delivered, but never read. That little, blue-red receipt, a tiny digital heartbeat, was absent. The line was dead. A mother's phone is her command center. For a businesswoman like Dee, it was her lifeline. For it to be silent, completely and utterly silent. On a Sunday morning when she had plans, it sent the first, cold trickle of fear down Raquel's spine. This wasn't like being late. This was like being erased. She called her brothers, TJ and Zach. The search began, small and frantic at first. They checked the farmhouse again, every room, calling her name into quiet corners. They called her personal assistant, Stephanie. Had she heard from Dee? Nothing. They called their stepfather, Dale Warner. He was out working the fields, as he always was. His response, when it came, was calm. Practical, even. Dee was upset, he said. She'd had a big blow-up with 2 of the truck drivers from their business the night before. One quit, the other she'd fired. She was probably at the lake house, their second property on Sand Lake. She went there to cool off when she needed space. It made a brittle kind of sense. Dee was known to have a temper. She felt things deeply, dramatically. The family knew this. But when Zach checked the lake house, it was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of any sign that Dee had been there recently. No dishes in the sink. No rumpled sheets on the bed. Just a still, vacation home quiet. Then, the brothers and sister remembered the most important detail, the one that turned worry into a clawing, gut-level dread. Lena, Dee's 9-year-old daughter. Her youngest child, the light of her life. The night before, Dee had made specific, careful arrangements for Lena to sleep over at her cousin's house. She had not picked Lena up that morning. Think about that. Really think about it. A mother in a troubled marriage might leave her husband. She might, in a fit of anger, storm out. But she does not. She cannot. Make loving, precise plans for her child's safety and comfort, and then simply abandon that child without a word. Without a hug. without a whispered, "I'll see you tomorrow." That detail was the first crack in the wall of normalcy. It was the first thread, thin and strong, that when pulled, would begin to unravel the entire tapestry of lies. This was no longer a case of a missing wife. This was the terrifying absence of a mother. And for Raquel, TJ, and Zach, that distinction changed everything. The police had to be called. Not later. Now. When the Lenawee County Sheriff's deputy arrived at the Warner farm, he was stepping into a scene of high emotion. On one side, worried, frightened adult children. On the other, a husband who projected an air of weary frustration. Dale Warner wasn't panicked. He wasn't demanding an all-points bulletin. He greeted the deputy like a man dealing with a familiar, annoying problem. His opening line set the tone for everything that would follow. Asterisk, I don't know if she's missing or she just left. Asterisk. With that one sentence, he planted the seed. He offered an alternative to tragedy. He presented a puzzle with a possible, mundane solution, a voluntary departure. He then began to build his case. He was a storyteller, and he painted a vivid picture of the night before. A heated argument. Dee, furious, talking about selling everything. Employees walking out. A marriage on the rocks. He painted Dee as the instigator, the volatile one, the source of the drama. Then, he provided the evidence. The kind of evidence you'd expect from someone who packed a bag and left. He narrated his own morning like a scene from a play. He'd come home from an early errand, he said. Around 6:30 a.m., Dee was asleep on the living room couch, where she'd been all night. He left again to go work. When he returned to the house later that morning, after 9 a.m., she was gone. And so were her things. Her makeup bag, her hair curler, her go bag, a small, pre-packed suitcase she kept ready for spontaneous overnight trips. Her wallet, her cell phone. It was a checklist of departure. It looked, for all the world, like a person who had decided to walk away. And then, Dale offered the piece de resistance. The symbolic, emotional proof. He said he went to the farm's office building, a short walk from the house. And there, resting squarely in the center of his own desk, he found it. Dee's wedding ring. A beautiful, expensive ring. A $50,000 symbol of a vow. She's never done that before, he told the deputy, his voice mixing confusion with a hint of betrayal. It was a masterstroke. It wasn't just an item left behind. It was a message. It screamed finality. It screamed I'm done. He had theories to patch any holes. Maybe she had a secret second phone, one she thought he didn't know about. Maybe she took a stack of cash, up to $100,000, from the family's safe. She'd gotten upset and left for a day or two before, he said. This was just more extreme. His performance was convincing. He was the reasonable man, slightly embarrassed by the fuss, confident his tempestuous wife would come back when she cooled off. He was annoyed the kids had escalated things so quickly by calling the police. Wait a day or so and see if she shows up, he suggested, as if dealing with a lost cat, not a missing human being. To a deputy taking an initial report, it must have sounded plausible, even likely. A domestic dispute, amplified by fearful children. But families have a different hearing. They know the true sound of a person's silence. And as the hours hardened into days, Dee's absence became a concrete, terrifying reality. Her bank accounts were frozen, untouched. Her social media profiles became digital grave sites, gathering dust. Her passport was gone from its place. But her cell phone never, ever pinged a single tower again. Investigators could find no record of this mysterious second phone. And that cash Dale mentioned? The $100,000 from the safe? Investigators learned Dee kept a separate, secret stash of cash hidden in her desk drawer at the office. Only she and her son Zach, the bookkeeper, knew about it. That money was still there. Every dollar of it. Why would a woman, fleeing in a rage to start a new life, leave a hidden fortune behind? Why would she take the risk of traveling without cash? The story was beginning to fray. The portrait of the dramatic, runaway wife was starting to peel, and beneath it, the detectives glimpsed the outline of something much darker. And on the land itself, the first physical clue was waiting, pressed into the soft, spring earth like a forgotten sentence. The farmhouse had a rear door that led from the living room directly outside. It was a door for family, for coming in with muddy boots, for letting the dog out. In the mud just outside that door, deputies saw something that didn't fit the story of a quiet Sunday morning. Massive, deep, fresh tire tracks. They weren't from a car or a pickup truck. They were the distinctive, chunky tread patterns of a JCB front loader. A giant piece of farm machinery. The very machine Deianne Warner had been driving that morning. The placement was bizarre. This wasn't the equipment yard. This was the family's parking area, right next to the house. The spot where the family's Hummer SUV was always parked. The JCB had been backed in so close that its heavy front loader arms were positioned directly in front of the living room door. It looked less like a parked vehicle and more like a delivery truck aligned with a loading dock. Why park a 10-ton piece of industrial equipment in your driveway? An employee provided a crucial timestamp. They had been on the property in the pre-dawn darkness that day, around 3:45 a.m. At that time, they saw the Hummer parked in its usual spot by the door. They also noticed, curiously, that the lights were on inside the house. But by 7:30 a.m., when Dale's own story said he parked the JCB in that exact spot, the Hummer was gone. So, a simple, devastating timeline began to form. The Hummer was there at 3:45 a.m. The Hummer was gone by 7:30 a.m. Dale said Dee was asleep on the couch until he parked the JCB at 7:30 a.m. The question became a trap. If the Hummer was already gone from that spot by 7:30, how could Dee still be asleep inside the house? Either she woke up, moved the Hummer, and then went back to sleep on the couch. A ridiculous notion. Or she was already gone when the Hummer moved. Or someone else moved it. Dale, when pressed, suggested Dee must have been the one to drive the Hummer to the office to leave her ring. But the farm's security cameras, which covered the office entrance, never saw her. Not a shadow, not a glimpse. And there was another oddity. The route the Hummer took from the house to the office. The cameras were placed for business security, to watch gates, equipment, and entries. They created a patchwork of coverage with blind spots in between. Whoever drove the Hummer that morning took a slow, serpentine path around the house, a path that carefully, perfectly, navigated through every single blind spot. They avoided every camera lens. It was a route you wouldn't take unless you had an intimate knowledge of the camera angles, unless you had studied the sight lines of your own property, unless you were trying to become a ghost. The farm was no longer just a home. It was a crime scene that was starting to speak, and its first words were a direct contradiction to the story Deianne Warner was telling. The Lenawee County Sheriff's Office knew this was spiraling beyond a routine missing persons case. The contradictions were too glaring. The stakes were too high. They called in the Michigan State Police, whose major case detectives are trained to see patterns in chaos. The MSP didn't just see a farm. They saw a narrative written in machinery, mud, and routine. Their job was to become forensic readers of Deianne Warner's world. They started with the bedrock of any investigation, the timeline. They needed to lock down every minute of that Sunday morning. They had Dale's story. Now they needed to test it against the unblinking, unforgiving clock of data. Dale's story was specific. He was a man of habit, and he recited his habits with confidence. Asterisk, he woke up and left the house by 6:30 a.m. Dee was on the couch. Asterisk, he used the JCB to move liquid fertilizer from one building to another, finishing just before 7:30 a.m. Asterisk, he parked the JCB by the house, walked inside, and saw Dee, still asleep on the couch, at 7:30 a.m. Asterisk, he then did other chores before leaving in a sprayer truck around 8:40 a.m. to work a distant field. It was a story of seamless, mundane productivity. A farmer's morning. But the evidence was a stutter in that seamless flow. The JCB's parking job was the first stutter. The moved Hummer was the second. The detectives brought Dale in for a formal interview. They weren't confrontational yet. They were collaborative. Help us understand. They laid an aerial photograph of his farm on the table. They asked him to walk them through it. To put an X where he parked the JCB. He did. Then, gently, they pointed to the X. They pointed to the spot where the Hummer always sat. And they asked the question that had no good answer within his story. If your JCB is here at 7:30 and the Hummer that is always here is gone, then where was Dee? You could see the gears turning, the story straining. He began to improvise. His theories became wilder, more cinematic. Maybe she knew the Hummer had a tracker, he mused. Asterisk, maybe she drove it to the office, left the ring, thought, oh, you can track this too, and then abandoned it? Vanished on foot, asterisk. He was trying to write a mystery novel to explain a physical contradiction. But real life obeys physics. It obeys logic. A vehicle cannot be in two places at once. A sleeping woman cannot drive a car. The detectives listened. They nodded. And they knew. They were watching a man try to rebuild a bridge he had already burned. While the physical farm told one story, the digital world around Dee Warner screamed another. A story of obsession, control, and paranoia. Police pulled data from the two vehicles Dee used. The Cadillac Escalade was her primary car. It had a built-in OnStar system. The data logs were chilling. In the 16 months before her disappearance, someone with access to the OnStar account had requested the Cadillac's location data over 2,000 times. 2,000. Do the math. That's an average of more than 4 times a day, every single day. 4 times a day, someone was quietly asking a satellite, where is she right now? Then there was the Hummer. Dale admitted it. He was so suspicious Dee was having an affair, he had a physical GPS tracker secretly installed on the vehicle. Data showed this hidden device was accessed 176 times before Dee eventually found it, ripped it out, and confronted him. This wasn't casual jealousy. This was surveillance. A cartography of control, mapping her every move. The control extended further. Investigators learned Dale had tried to have an employee secretly download all the data from Dee's phone. There were hints, from friends and family, of hidden cameras inside the home itself. His wife's life was to be a transparent box, with him always watching. And on the morning of April 25th, his own digital fingerprints left smudges all over the crime scene. His cell phone records showed he tried to access the farm's security camera system via a phone app before 9:00 a.m. This was before the call from Stephanie, Dee's assistant, that first alerted him the kids were worried. When detectives asked him about it, he first denied it. Then he changed his story. He was just looking for Dee. But why look for your wife on security cameras if you believe she is safely asleep on the couch, or has simply driven off in a huff? Then came the most haunting digital trace of all. At 7:38 a.m., just minutes after he claimed to have seen her asleep on the couch, and a full hour and a half before he claimed to realize she was missing, his phone sent a command. It unlocked the doors to Dee's Cadillac. When confronted, he was flustered. He didn't remember. Maybe he used the app just to see where the car was located, he offered weakly. But the implication froze the blood. Dee always kept her purse, with her wallet, her keys, her driver's license, on the passenger seat of that Cadillac. These were the very items Dale said were missing with her. The items that proved she packed a bag. The police theory crystallized. In the cold, frantic quiet after the violence, he needed to retrieve those items. To plant them in the house. To build the illusion of a packed bag. So, standing in the dawn light, perhaps still in his yard, he used the phone in his hand to silently, remotely, pop the locks on his wife's car. To take what he needed to fabricate her departure. For years, he had tracked her. His final act of tracking was to find her empty car, to use its digital signature to perfect his lie. The man who knew everywhere his wife had been was now scrambling, digitally and desperately, to explain where she was not. Without a body, a murder case is a ghost. But money? Money is solid. It leaves a paper trail. And as Dee remained missing, Dale Warner began writing a new chapter in the ledger, one of breathtaking audacity. Dee was the legal owner of their most valuable asset, the trucking company. It pulled in millions annually. With her gone, Dale moved swiftly. He stopped her paychecks. He took operational control. He gave his own son, Jiren, power of attorney and temporary custody of little Lena. He was consolidating power, preparing for a long battle. But control wasn't cash. He needed liquidity. Just a few months after Dee vanished, in the autumn of 2021, Dale applied for a massive loan. $1.4 million. He applied for it through Dee's trucking company. The loan documents required the owner's signature. They required a copy of the owner's driver's license. And somehow, the missing Dee Warner provided both. Her signature appeared on the paperwork. A photocopy of her missing driver's license was attached. The bank approved the loan. Later, when a large payment came into the business, Dale simply lent the money to himself, funneling nearly $1 million into his personal accounts. It was fraud. Obvious, brazen fraud. But to the detectives, it was something far more valuable than a crime. It was a confession of knowledge. This is not the behavior of a man hoping his wife will return. This is the behavior of a man who knows she will not. You do not meticulously forge a missing woman's signature on seven-figure documents if you think she might walk back through the door and ask for an accounting. This paper trail was Dale screaming, in the silent language of finance, that Dee was never coming home. The family, armed with this evidence, fought back in civil court. They petitioned to have Dee declared legally dead, to freeze the estate Dale was looting. A judge saw Dale's actions with clear eyes. He was found in contempt of court for blatantly ignoring court orders and selling Dee's assets. The most shocking act, selling the trucking company itself, the heart of her estate. For this, he was sentenced to 93 days in jail and ordered to repay huge sums. The civil courts had held him accountable for the theft, but the criminal courts still needed to prove the murder. They needed the one thing that was still, agonizingly, absent: a body. For Dee's family, the years that followed were a special kind of hell. The not knowing is an abyss. It swallows grief, leaving only a sucking, endless vacuum. Every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday was a reminder of the void. They held vigils. They gave interviews. Dee's brother, Greg Hardy, put up a $50,000 reward for information. They pleaded with the public. They lived in a state of suspended animation, unable to mourn, unable to move on. The Michigan State Police kept searching. They executed new warrants. They brought in the FBI with their specialized resources. They used cadaver dogs, their sensitive noses sniffing the air for a scent that seemed to have been wiped from the earth. They used ground-penetrating radar, rolling the machines across the fields around the farmhouse, looking for disturbances in the soil. They dug where the machines hinted at secrets. They found nothing. The frustration was a physical weight on the investigators. They had the who. They had the why. The timeline was shattered. The digital evidence was damning. The financial motive was clear. They had enough for a prosecutor to build a strong circumstantial case. But without the where, it felt fragile. A body is the foundation of a murder trial. Without it, the defense can spin tales of life on the run, of new identities in far-off countries. A jury might doubt. Dale's lawyers began crafting that exact fantasy. Asterisk, she could get fake IDs online. She could be living under a new name. She wanted to escape. Asterisk. The family had to endure this fantasy, this insult to their mother's love for them, because a crucial piece of the puzzle was missing. The pressure on the police was immense. They knew the truth was on that farm. They could feel it. It was in the soil, in the buildings, in the very air. But where? In the absence of facts, intuition sometimes speaks. And for Dee's brother, Greg, and her son, Parker, that intuition had a specific, metallic shape. A tank. In the days immediately following Dee's disappearance, they had both, separately, seen Dale working on an old, rusted anhydrous ammonia tank. These are massive, industrial vessels, shaped like giant bullets or torpedoes, used to store liquid fertilizer. They'd the edges of farm fields, commonplace, ignored. Seeing Dale work on one was profoundly odd. These tanks, when they corrode or fail, are not repaired. They're condemned and replaced. It's cheaper and safer. And Dale was no master welder. He had basic skills, the kind for patching a fence, not pressure sealing industrial steel. Yet there he was, day after day, grinding at rusty metal, welding, painting. He looked haunted, exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. It was such a bizarre image that it stuck in their minds, a burr of unease. They talked about it, in hushed, horrified tones. What if he, cut that thing open and put her in there? Parker would voice the unthinkable. Greg would shake his head, dismissing it as too gruesome, too complex. That's a lot of work. He's not that good of a welder. But the idea wouldn't leave. A sealed steel tomb, sitting in the open air. Who would ever think to look inside a piece of farm equipment? It was the perfect hiding place precisely because it was so boring, so functional, so ordinary. They whispered their suspicion to the police. For 3 years, it remained just that. A whisper, a family's worst nightmare, a theory too awful to be true. But sometimes, the worst nightmares are real. August 2024. 3 years, 3 months, and 3 weeks after Dee Warner vanished. The Michigan State Police executed 2 new search warrants. The focus was not the wide fields this time. It was a specific barn on property still controlled by Deianne Warner. And inside that barn, their attention zeroed in on a piece of equipment, an anhydrous ammonia tank. It had a handwritten tag wired to its valve, noting it was out of service. But the tag wasn't what interested them. It was the weld. Running along a seam was evidence of a crude, manual repair. A weld that was not done in a factory. It was the work of a grinder and a welding torch in someone's hands. The cap of the tank had been cut off and then welded back on. With a warrant, they seized the tank. This wasn't a dig, it was a removal. They took the hulking steel vessel to a secure facility. They needed to see inside without opening it. They used an industrial X-ray machine, the kind used to inspect pipelines and ship hulls. The machine hummed. The image resolved on the screen. And inside the dark, cylindrical void, meant to hold nothing but corrosive liquid fertilizer, the X-ray revealed the unmistakable shadow of a human form. Curled, fetal, forever sealed in a steel cocoon. He didn't hide her in the woods. He didn't bury her in the soft earth of her own farm. He placed her in the one thing everyone would overlook. A broken tank, tagged for scrap, sitting in a barn for over 3 years. In plain sight. In the most ordinary of places, Dee Warner had been found. The medical examiner's report was clinical, final, and heartbreaking. Cause of death, strangulation. It was intimate. It was violent. It required proximity and passion of the darkest kind. It fit the timeline of a final, catastrophic argument in the early morning hours. A confrontation that escalated from words to hands, and then to irreversible silence. With the body found, the last vestige of Deianne Warner's fantasy vanished. The runaway wife story dissolved into dust, exposed as the cruel fiction it always was. Michigan State Police now had everything they needed. They obtained a warrant and arrested Deianne Warner for first-degree murder. But a final, haunting question lingered, not of guilt, but of method. How? The tank was enormous, heavy. The weld, while crude, required more skill than Dale was known to possess. He had seemed exhausted, frantic, in those days after the murder. The grinding, the lifting of a body, the welding, the painting. Was this a one-man job? The investigation's gaze turned to his son, Jiren. The son he had given power of attorney. The son who was the temporary guardian of Lena. The son who, by multiple accounts, was a competent and skilled welder. In March of 2024, before Dee's body was discovered, police arrested Deianne Warner. The charges, tampering with evidence, accessory to murder after the fact. The message was clear. They believed Dale had not acted alone in the cover-up. They believed a father, in his most desperate hour, had turned to his son. The specifics of the evidence against Jiren were sealed, a mystery within the mystery. But his arrest painted a picture of a silent, terrible pact made in the shadow of the farmhouse. The charges against Jiren were later dropped, prosecutors citing a missing witness, leaving that thread dangling, a painful unresolved question for Dee's family. Deianne Warner now sits in jail, awaiting a trial scheduled for January 2026. The discovery of the body transformed the case. What was a powerful circumstantial web is now anchored in physical, horrific fact. The timeline, the digital traces, the financial fraud, they are no longer just clues. They are the roadmap that leads directly to a welded-shut tank. The family has filed a $100 million wrongful death lawsuit. The number is symbolic, a roar of outrage. It is an attempt to quantify the unquantifiable, the loss of a mother, a sister, a daughter, the theft of 3 years of peace, the utter depravity of the hiding place. They have a form of closure now, the coldest kind. They have her back. They can finally lay Deianne Warner to rest in hallowed ground, with dignity and love, not in ammonia and rusted steel. They can finally speak to her, across the terrible distance. As her brother Greg said, the simple, profound truth that covers everything. Asterisk. We certainly like to tell her we love her very much. Asterisk. So, let's return to the first question. What does a perfect crime look like? Dale Warner thought he had designed it. He didn't look for a hidden place. He used the visible, the routine, the utterly unremarkable. He weaponized the everyday. The farm wasn't just his home, it was his accomplice. The JCB became a tool for moving more than fertilizer. The daily schedule became an alibi. The rusty tank, a piece of junk, became a vault. He believed the sheer normalcy of it all would blind people. That they would see a farmer working and think nothing of it. That they would see a tank and see only a tank. He made 2 fatal miscalculations. First, he underestimated the ferocity of a family's love. A love that is not a passive feeling, but an active force. A love that refuses to accept convenient lies, that keeps searching in the face of hopelessness, that whispers the terrible truth until the world has no choice but to listen. Second, he forgot that when you stain the ordinary with evil, the ordinary itself becomes a witness. It stops being invisible. A tire track becomes an accusation. A digital ping becomes a scream. A welded seam becomes a scar that tells the whole story. The perfect hiding place is a myth. Because the truth has density. It has weight. It presses against the walls of any container, no matter how strong. It strains the welds of any lie, no matter how carefully crafted. And eventually, always, it finds its way into the light. He thought the land would keep his secret. He thought no one would ever find her. But they did.